This morning's talk, I want to talk about a little bit about teachings of Dogen Zenji, the 13th century founder of the Soto lineage. Dogen practiced in China and then came back to Japan and founded a school, Soto School, and I have competition. So it has lots of teachings that on, is it Wednesday that we're studying the Shobogenzo? On every Wednesday at noon, we study book study, gather in a group of either 2 people or 7 or 8 people and study Dogen's main text, quite long teaching called the Shobogenzo, the treasury of the true Dharma I. So lots of slogans or ideas and so on out of that, and sometimes we just contemplate one of them because they're so powerful for us to work with. And the one that that I'm going to talk about today is I've written it down. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. So to study the way, or to study the Buddha Dharma, or to study meditation as is taught by the Buddha and as was taught by Dogen Zenji, is to study what this idea of an individual, what this idea of identity, of self-centeredness, of wanting things for ourselves, grasping and so on, based on the 3 poisons of passion, aggression, ignorance, the way we work with that emotionally. To study the way is to study the self, and to study the way is to forget the self. So what is this forget the self? Thought we were studying it. So it wouldn't be exactly forgetting or ignoring or stepping away from that, but would rather be including everything else, to take some of this self-centeredness that is kind of automatic. As soon as anything occurs, we think about it in relationship to, well, how does that affect me? How are things going for me? How am I? Do I get anything out of this? Is this helpful to me? We do it a lot. And initially, when we sit down doing sitting meditation, holding this posture or this one, and we observe each one of us, as some of you have heard me say over and over again, I'm a very boring teacher. I keep talking about the same thing. What we see is what continues to crank up in terms of passion, aggression, ignorance, even in little tiny whirlpools of that. Doesn't have to be very much for it to build into a tsunami. So to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to, what was it?
Forget the self.
Oh yeah, forget. And to forget the self is to be awakened by all things. So in forgetting the self, and for just, we're not talking about pushing it away. We're just saying forget it. And one of the ways that you can do that is to be very, very clear on what's happening out here. When I say very clear, I'm not talking in terms of right or wrong, successful, not successful. praise or blame. I'm saying just in terms of its basic qualities. The basic quality is what color it is, which way it's moving, whether it's coming towards you or moving away. And this is, it's not easy to do as a kind of a psychological project, even though people try to do that. It's very challenging. In the beginning of that practice, it seems to be of forgetting the self, seeing how we can't really forget ourselves. We keep thinking about how things look in relation to us, what we want, what we don't want. We're always looking at what we want, what we don't want, what we don't care about. There seems to be a constant chatter going on that is perpetuated by things like I sometimes say, why questions don't work. It's not that why it doesn't have a little bit of value. We want to know why you have a flat tire, because you ran over a nail. So there's why and because. And that works a little bit. It works just enough to keep us from driving over nails if we see them, or staying out of areas that have a lot of nails in the ground. But it's very immediate. We're able to work with it it's a very immediate kind of situation. Why? Because. But if you say what, when you sit down, if you say what something is, actually what it is in its own nature deeply, something happens with the awareness where it stops being circular. Why? Because. Why? Because. And we drop out of the logic, if you want to call it that, of samsara, of who's at fault, who gets credit. That's really a powerful one right there. If you see someone doing something wrong, making a mistake, doing something that you just told them not to do, they're doing it anyway. It's the simplistic approach to that is, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. Didn't I tell you? Why? And that taken to extremes, it's the police are called in, and it gets really warlike. So it can be very challenging when we are asked to forget the self. It can be very challenging to forget how this world of cause and effect is occurring in a way that is scary or not very supportive or even dangerous. So I think it's good. Pardon me, I can't seem to get my throat clear. It seems to be valuable to, as long as you can, to hold your seat and see what is actually moving, see what is actually occurring in your environment as carefully as possible. As soon as you see something move, if you add any thought to it at all, and when I say at all, I'm sure there's exceptions, but do anything with whatever's arising, we immediately, at least right at that moment, stop really investigating or looking at it. We start to get information, and we start to take that as proof or whatever. So it seems to be very necessary to wait and allow our awareness to go deeply into that and see what is that in the deepest possible way. In other words, take your time. Don't jump to conclusions. And if you do jump to conclusions, then notice that's what you're doing. So how is it this is going to be, you're going to be awakened by all things? Or the translation out of the book that we have is enlightened by all things. I read that right? I forgot. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened or enlightened by all things. Yeah, I remembered. Any questions? I have more to say, but I could chatter here all day. Yes, sir.
If there's no self anywhere, what does it mean to be awakened by all things when you forget the self?
So awakening, we're not talking about an individual awakening. We're talking about awakening. Awakening doesn't belong to anyone. Enlightenment isn't a state of mind. Quite often in writing on it, even contemporary writing of today, it looks like some state that you acquire, you get to where you're suddenly, you have this sense of equanimity that is totally balanced. And so it looks like a state of mind, but without grasping at a self or grasping at an other or an enemy or a friend for that matter. Then there's the polarity is not there. And then any kind of a polarity that arises is just in the situation you're in. The rain comes, the clouds come, the clouds go away, the sun comes back out. More? I didn't really answer your question. So
I guess I'm just, the whole idea being, what was the last line? Being awakened to all things, be awakened by all things.
To do that, to forget the self, is to be awakened by all things, or be enlightened by all things would be the translation that we have.
I'm just curious about the all things part of that.
Everything that arises, everything that appears, every person. This is what it means to see everywhere you look. You don't see any separation between yourself and others. You don't see separate beings anymore, or separated. And this is what they count on, is their separation to get their way. I'm separate, so I want this. Well, I don't really like that. Well, I don't feel that way. I'm just not feeling it. That just substantiates, reifies, supports narcissism or self-centeredness. You can't give up something that is not real, so you can't give up yourself. But it has to be seen. It has to be an awareness that is so insistent and so penetrating and so stubborn that you are going to see this if it's the last thing you ever do, is to use the fancy movie lingo. Senchu.
You've talked about a mirror-like quality where when you look at things, you see yourself. Yeah. What are you seeing? You're
seeing that the other person that you see is not separate from you. So it has a mirror quality. It's not really like a mirror, but it's not exactly like. Sometimes it's more like a mirror than actually looking in the mirror. Because if you notice when you look in a mirror, you kind of see a stranger. That's why it's something a little suspicious there about mirrors. And that actually lets you know that you're not really aware of what this is. A mirror meditation is actually an actual practice that some people promote or teach. Also sitting down and just looking into another person's face for a long period of time. So we use just like in the third chant, the song of the jewel mirror, Samadhi, Hokyo Zammai. It's not exactly a mirror, the jewel mirror. It's a mirror because if you look at it, you see yourself. But it's not just a reflection. It's just using the mirror as an image to help convey that. And the jewel part means it is valuable, hidden treasure. More. Shoko.
Sometimes I hear you say situations are my teacher. Is that the same as what's being said by awakened by all things?
Yes. And that's something that my teacher said. also when someone asked him, so now, your gurus are all passed away and gone and you've left Tibet, and this is with Trungpa Rinpoche. And he said, so who is your teacher? And he said, situations. Anyone could say that with situations, and we all do that to some extent. Have you noticed you're doing one thing and the situation changes and you say, oh, I guess I have to switch gears here because I have to turn on the windshield wipers because it's raining. It's very similar. That's why it's ordinary. It's both profound because we see that the very self we were grasping at is a fiction. The very thing we were trying to defend and support and promote and is unreal. So it's like that. It's like it's raining, turn on the windshield wipers. So the situation is actually determining what you do next. So with the teaching person, if he or she sees that they are no longer separate fundamentally from anything, then everywhere they look, they see themselves. You see your body everywhere. If you look down, you see your body. If you look out in the sky, you see your body. And it's not like, oh my goodness, I'm so amazing. I can't believe I'm the universe. It's not exactly like that. That's more like bullshit. So situations would be, you would look at the situation, and this doesn't mean that you're this all-knowing person that's tracking all the situations and seeing the situations change and taking notes on the situations. You could say it's kind of the opposite of that. You're kind of have this kind of duh feeling. When everybody else is coming up with ideas and opinions and protocols and, well, this is that's happening, and you should do this, and you should do that. Well, you shouldn't do that. Do this, do this. The world is full of do this, don't do that. Authority. There is no authority. There's no centralized place where everything is known. There isn't any. So that being said, if you're being awakened by all things, then you're being awakened. You're awakened to what? No separation. You see that you're not separate because you're not all convoluted or you're not all stuffed down inside of your dirty sock of yourself. It's not really that funny.
Yes, it is.
I always wonder when people laugh at things that aren't funny. That's what comedians call them. More?
It seems like whenever you talk about situations are my teacher, the way that I understand it or work with it, there seems to be a separation between the situation and me. How am I misunderstanding?
That's your projection. That's a projection. More? In other words, a projection is something you think is out there that is your imagination standing in front of what is actually true. Your own imagination is standing in front of or hiding ultimate truth. Relative truth, the very name for it in Tibetan is kunzup, or means all dressed up. It means that it's what is real is wearing a mask, is all dressed up, and we believe it's that, when actually it's being hidden truth. More.
How do I work with that?
Sit a lot. Literally sit, train your mind to see what is true. That's what you're doing when you sit on the cushion, when you're training yourself day after day. You're training yourself to slowly see, not to stop grasping things, not to stop rejecting things, not to stop shutting down on things, but to see the way that you do it. Just to see that, if you just see that you're doing it, it just starts to because it gets its energy by being objected to or fought with. You can't fight with what this is. If you do, you promote a further belief in some kind of a person that needs to be enlightened, for that matter. Enlightenment is already the case. Just stop going to war with everything. And how do you do that? You have to see the way you keep going to war with things so that you can, and it's difficult because when you see the way you're doing it, you want to stop it. If you see the way you're doing it, if you can't stop it, then you want to find who's running the show here, who's to blame for this. Sometimes people go back and blame their parents. Not particularly very fair. You might better blame your great-great-grandmother for what she did or didn't do. So continuing to look at it, my way of saying it, it just strengthens the seeing part rather than the thinking part. We're not getting rid of thinking or logic, but we're strengthening actually seeing what is true so that you can, so that in your everyday post-meditation or in your everyday life, when you get up off the cushion, so that when you're doing something, you're more present. You don't have to try to be present. You don't have to try to be in the now. There is no such thing. It's just a concept. Something when you're not separate, there is no now. There's no space. There's no time. Those are all concepts, including space. They're just concepts. We're not saying that they don't apply to something in a certain way, in a relative way, but the ultimate nature is no past, no future, no present, and also not the absence of those. That's why it's so difficult, because it's not two. It's non-duality. Not two. It's just like there's not two people in here. There's not even one person in here.
What is fear?
I'm afraid I don't know. Fear is what comes up when there's a willingness or an unwillingness to be open, and a clutching at something that is not real for a reference point, thinking that you have something to lose. We're not saying that you're so wild and crazy that you're going to walk into a burning house. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not separate from the universe, therefore I'm going to burn myself. We're not saying that. We're just saying that I'm saying that it's we start to get paranoid about things, thinking that something's going to get us or something's going to. Remember when you were little, you thought something was going to get you?
Little.
Yeah. That's another question somewhere here.
The ego. And you talk about fear, and I was wondering if maybe it is the I and my. Does that have something to do with fear or any of the poisons?
Yeah, it does.
What is the relationship between the I and my then?
Me and my stuff. Me and my fear. Me and my opinions. Me and me and me. Just all the time. Not something to get rid of. We don't have to pretend to be awake. Pretend to be not concerned about ourselves. We don't have to do anything but be aware. If the awareness is primary, then everything will sort itself out. You could say, just a way of saying it. Not saying there isn't things that you might need to do or stop doing or start doing other things. But without really strong awareness, then we don't see the way we deceive ourselves. We actually think that what we're doing is okay. We can see that other people are having problems with, we're fine. We're improving. There is no progress. Sorry. Go find another. A lot of teachers say there is, so go listen to them. I'm saying there really isn't. I would be dishonest if I were saying that you can get better and better and better and better. I think you can get more and more clear somehow. but it's not really like a progression, like going up a ladder, getting higher. Yes.
Do we see, is it just a progress, or our belief in progress is just another reference point?
Yeah. And the instances that we sometimes have of like a sudden flash of openness or an insight or kensho or any of that, those are experiential. Those experiences, even Satori, it's something that happens, and anything that happens to you will go away. Just the very nature of something happening means it will stop happening. Might take 100 years. Or it will start to change into some other situation. But fundamentally seeing that you are no longer a solid being. You never were. So that's part of the including the past and the future. You never were one. When you see it, you say, well, this has always been like this. This is so simple, I could have missed it. And maybe you did. Maybe you have been missing it for 40 years. Sheldon.
How does our ideas and opinions about awakening help us to be awakened by all things?
Well, teachings are conceptual supports, passion, aggression, ignorance, talking about the three basic ways. There's lots of variables. There's three ways that we object to the way things are or fight with it. So by looking at that and going over the basic teachings of the Buddha, everything is dependently arisen. So there is nothing comes from its own side as its own special self being. That is, that's why it's so humorous when somebody states their opinion about anything, even if the opinion has a lot of qualities to it that shows that they really look closely, and it's just their opinion that whatever, the Republicans are idiots. Just my opinion. It's as soon as you make any statement about anything, this is what happens. You look no further.
How can you make a statement with awareness?
You can't. I mean, how can you make a statement and still be genuine?
What?
All I'm doing is setting up here and lying.
Do you
Only one
make
line.
statements?
Huh?
Do you make statements?
All the time. What am I doing now?
I don't know.
Making statements.
So how are you not saying that with awareness?
I'm not accusing you of anything.
What's the difference?
I'm up here and you're not. Is that good? Good enough? No? Is that good enough? No.
Christina has 4 questions.
I bet she does.
Her first one is, so if we stay in sense fields and respond to the Dharma of this moment, is that leading with awareness?
Maybe.
Then what does it look, feel, taste like to lead with awareness?
Could be anything. Could be boring. Could be exciting. Could be. There's no affirmation going to come along and tell you that you're doing it right. That's more about samsara, or this world of cause and effect, where you can get ahead and not fall behind and be appreciated and not be ignored.
The next one, why is a awareness periodic?
I didn't say that. Is she making a statement?
She just says, why is awareness periodic?
Well, you got to get sleep sometime.
And then her last question is, what is thusness?
Thusness is whatever's in front of you. Thusness is another word for emptiness. It's another word for all the other fancy words, tathagata, tathagata garba. It's just this, just precisely this, as it is, minus your presumptions about it. Or if you see the presumptions, then you don't mind if they're there. Then, you know, it's just like having a cat with long toenails. What's interesting about that is to see people who aren't smiling and going. Any more, Christina?
Not at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And the maybe there is not meant to put off your questions, Christina, but it's meant to say you need to really go deeper down. The question is actually, the question itself needs to be a deeper question in order to get closer to the response that that would be helpful to her. Not that maybe isn't helpful. Lisa.
To study the self is to forget the self. What does that feel like, look like, smell like?
I don't know. How does it sound to you?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I would say you're doing it. If you're practicing, then you're doing it. You can't remember what you forgot. Have you noticed that? And if you can't remember what you forgot, then as far as you're concerned, you have a good memory. Right?
My memory's awesome. Yeah.
The idea there for that kind of a statement, even though it's translated out of Japanese, it still carries a lot of weight. I mean, we still understand what is actually being said there actually puts us in a position of actual inquiry. It isn't something where we're all sitting here thinking, well, that's foolish. I got to get to the laundromat. It stops us because it is said out of an individual, A. Dogen, in the 13th century, who understood something about the nature of mind. He said to study the self is to forget the self. Even though it was said in a different language, he probably heard it from Ru Jing, his Chinese master, or something along that line, and probably was paraphrasing it or whatever. But something about that is fascinating to us. We use those particular concepts, and it helps us look closer at what does it mean to forget? What is a self? How can you forget a self? All of that seems to be very important. There's very important support because he's using very relative terms, but he's pointing at the absolute. You can feel it. You can feel that something there is really powerful. These are the words of a master. More.
Thank you.
Chuck.
When we first look at a person, even if we've never met them before, there's this whole wash of things we put over them.
Yes.
But it seems like if you try and fight that, you're paralyzed.
Yes. Don't fight it. It's only, I say this so many ways and so many, over and over again, I say, you don't have to be different than you are. You just have to be aware. And if you're aware, the way you project onto people, the way as soon as you meet somebody, you get out your watercolors and immediately start painting it. Instead of just seeing what is appearing there. So the process of noticing the way you project is the way you deal with projection. You have to see that you're projecting. So when you see that you're projecting, which you're doing, like you're talking about it in such a way that you're aware that you're doing that. So that's how it begins. That's how it starts, or that's part of, depending on where you're at in that spectrum. And then at some point, just like this image that's often used, a traditional image is an onions, You can peel an onion and take the layers of an onion, but it's still an onion until it isn't an onion. And so same way with that, we keep projecting, and then if we have a strong awareness practice, we become painfully aware of the degree to which we keep objecting to things with our own opinions or ideas and our laminations and this little patina we put over everything to make it more palatable or acceptable or less threatening. So awareness is king. The awareness of seeing that, of seeing what's moving there is your hand and your brush and changing that or making that different or modifying it or making it more acceptable, more realistic or less realistic or doing anything with it at all. Just has to be seen the way we do that. See that feeling of separation, reach out and modify the other. So this is why some of the teachings, the emptiness teachings talk about empty of self, which I'm sure you've studied that. Empty of self, empty of other. This is something we're studying in Khenpo Sotrim Jamso's progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, is to see that there is a progression of understanding emptiness. I don't think everyone does it. You're going to do it exactly the same way, but there is some kind of a moving more and more closely to the actual emptiness. More?
Well, I've noticed also after I've been through an experience, I want to tell it to other people.
Yeah.
To help solidify it or redefine it or justify it or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So then I start feeling, well, I shouldn't be saying anything. Then I'm paralyzed again.
You said you shouldn't be saying anything?
Yeah, I feel like I shouldn't be saying
Well, the saying I shouldn't be saying anything, not saying anything is fine, but saying you shouldn't be saying anything is extra. We're adding something on to the very original pristine feeling of just not saying it. That's what begins to occur. But there's no credential. There's no result. There's no feeling of I'm doing the right thing, or there's no feeling of I shouldn't be doing that. We're not doing anything extra with it. And to do that is to get closer and closer from the viewpoint of awareness, closer and closer to realizing no self, no other, to realizing emptiness. Emptiness is completely full, bright, shining, and making one hell of a racket. But we keep looking for, when we hear emptiness, we need to find something that's missing. Yes.
So where does the call to meditate, to come here, come from? I'm just wondering whether that call to meditate,
yes,
which I feel,
yes,
does it come from the same corrupted thing which I'm observing when I'm sitting and looking at the world?
it's fundamentally not separate. So the way we talk about it is the way it's talked about in the teachings over and over again, just not my idea, is first contemplate the preciousness of being free and well favored. You're free to come here. You did. It's well favored in that you have your mind is such that when you hear this kind of a message, amongst all the messages you're hearing, that's the one you want to go to. That's where, it's like seeing lots of food and your body just knows you need potassium. Not exactly like that, of course. I don't know anything about that kind of stuff, but it's like that kind of a pull. It's like when I saw, give you, and I don't often talk about my own background too much, but this is an interesting story. Back in 1973, I'm living in this town where I was born, and I go to a place called Read More Books bookstore. I go down and I see on the bookshelf, I see these yellow books, and I'm going in there to read books on spiritually materialistic stuff, yoga and astral projection, and anything I could get my hands on. Anything weird, I wanted it. So I saw these books by Trungpa Rinpoche, and I picked up the book and I looked at it and I said his name, and I'm reading it, and I've already read Wei Nang. I've read the Tibetan book and the Great Liberation by W.Y. Evans once. I've read all of Alan Watts' books. I'm just, pretty well educated guy. And so I'm with my great education. I'm there and I'm looking at this book and this is almost literal. I'm looking at the back of the book. I'm reading, and I don't like the sound of the name Trungpa. Trungpa. Still don't like it. So, Trungpa. Chu. There's an umlaut about that. I'm not sure what you do with an O with an umlaut. It looks like somebody with their mouth wide open with little eyes. Looking at that. And then I'm reading along, and then I realize this guy's alive. He's not a dead guy from the 13th century. He's alive. I put that book down immediately. I don't want anything to do with that. Alive, that means that if he's alive and he's writing books, maybe he might tell me what to do, or he might get into my mind, or maybe it's a cult. I mean, it probably is a cult because all the Buddhas are dead, the dead guys. So, and I left. But about 2 weeks later, I just could not stop thinking about that book. And then I told myself a story, and the story went something like this. Well, Bob, I used to call myself Bob. Well, Bob, you really ought to go and check it out. What are you afraid of? Go there and see what it's about. Give the guy the benefit of the doubt. So I went back and as I often do, I started in the back of the book, because if you look at the back of the book first, then you see the index and you see what they read in order to even write the book. Kind of sneaky, but that's how I did it. So I would, and then I don't think there was an index in that first book. There was a glossary though, so that I read a little bit of that, and then I just opened it up in the center. That'll kind of put me right into it, and because I'm so intelligent that I'll be able to discern what he's saying there. I actually felt like this, that I could figure out anything. Really smart. So I opened it up. I started reading, and then I started reading about the construction of ego, the way, and if you've read Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, started reading it, and then it starts to get me. I start to realize this might be something I should read. And so I go to the beginning of the book and I start reading the introduction on the Three Lords of Materialism. And I'm blown away by it. I'm really frightened by it. It's extremely frightening for me. Still is when I go back to it. It's like, ugh, it's painful because I know I'm in for it. When I say I'm in for it, I mean, somebody is actually going to be able to help me where I'm at, probably, if I listen to them. So I went back and I bought that book and Meditation and Action, the other book he had written when he was in Great Britain at Samyeling. And I read those books, and before I even finished cutting through, I was on the phone trying to find out where he was at. So does that apply to your situation?
Well, I'm just wondering whether this is what you call the hidden treasure on the table full of
it is a hidden treasure. That's actually her Dharma name, is Hidden Treasure. Senshu means hidden treasure, which is not a compliment.
Well, I was terrified when I told you when you invited me here for a week.
Oh, you're very terrified. How are you feeling now?
I came on for 3 days.
Very good. It's very cautious. Some people don't come at all. Some people don't. They just don't. Or they come, they leave. And of course, not with some kind of, but with some kind of story about, well, this guy's, what does he know? He's saying, he's not a Tibetan Lama. I need a Lama to tell me. Or I need somebody who's famous. I need to talk to Adyashanti. Well, try to get an appointment with that guy. That's like saying, I think I'm going to talk to Eckhart Tolle. You might be able to talk to him, but you might have to have a whole lot of money or be famous yourself. No, not taking anything away from those people. I think they're helpful to people that come to them, get helped by them.
David is listening this morning.
Hi, David.
And he says, hello, Unyo, I'm watching and totally confused.
Good.
Is it like that in the beginning?
Yes. Just don't add to the confusion by trying to get rid of it. You don't have to get rid of something you don't understand. If it's confusing, then the downside is how it feels. The upside is, aha, now I get to actually look at what my mind is doing. How do you think I feel? I never got any better.
Well, what is different?
No self. Self is gone. The solid being who was once assumed was true is just not there anymore. Nor is it not there. There isn't any reference point anymore.
So is that the last line too, of what you read? Being awakened by all things?
Being awakened by all things. Yeah.
No reference point.
I had another note here, one I wanted to read that from the 8th century sage of India, Shantideva, said, joy is wanting others to be happy, and misery is wanting happiness for yourself. So serve others. And it does feel, to respond to what David said, it can feel confusing. It can feel, especially if you've not really entered into that area that is all like it's dark and it's tied up and it's wound up and you don't want to look at it. And then if you listen to a few words from someone, not that they're going to make sense to everyone, but they happen to, resonate with you, then quite often, I think it can happen where you feel very confused about it, because it can be frightening to suddenly realize that by hearing a few words, your life may never be the same. You may never be able to stay down in your little cocoon, as has been called. I heard recently, and I think this is a good example. Awakening is kind of terrifying, because it's like stepping off a 100-foot pole, as the old Zen saying is, stepping off the 100-foot pole. In other words, a 100-foot pole is all the things you know and how you've learned and you've got it, you understand. And then there's some point you have to just give up everything. You have to give up your understanding. You have to give up everything to see reality. So the downside is, you're falling. But the upside is you never hit. You never hit bottom. There isn't any bottom. I have a few minutes left. If there's help me.
The thing about the second phrase, to study the self is to forget the self. The thing about study seems to me like a intentional, conscious, volitional effort. And forgetting the unconscious or unintentional thing. So what is forgetting then? Is it forgetting, or more about unlearning? Where is there any kind of effort or consciousness?
I think he's deliberately vague about that, because it is a you could even say don't forget that. Don't put too much attention on me and my stuff. My way of talking about it to people is if they tell me how terrible they're feeling, it depends on who it is, because some people don't need to hear this kind of feedback. They're too fragile, you could say, in a lot of ways. But sometimes people come and I say, I don't care how you feel. That doesn't mean that I don't care about them, but I know that by buying into that situation, it makes it harder for them to see the way they're generating their own suffering by grasping at a self. Forget the self. Doesn't mean ignore it.
So is there a volitional effort to forgetting then? Or?
There can be, but the causes and conditions, the dependent origination dictates that there are so many causes and conditions that you cannot figure it out. You can't figure out, well, am I the person who should, or shouldn't I, or should I? So this is why the awareness practice of sitting meditation, Shikantaza, is so important, and isn't is taught in so many different ways. The way that I, having done it lots of different ways, the way that it looks like it's appropriate to do is as little as possible. Hold still, watch what moves, and what moves is probably exactly, more than likely, definitely what you need to see, and not go to war with. It's difficult to see something very negative that the ego mind or the self-centered mind think, well, I got to get rid of that. I can't be having that in the same room with me. So it's very difficult to acknowledge the negativity that is arising as the preferences of a unreal self. More, but it could be. Go back to your could be that.
If it's not another idea or opinion or projection.
Yeah, and that's the area that's why it's, you have to do it. That's why even the teaching person, he or she, should not be meddling with your karma. When I say this, I don't know, maybe that's on another planet that'll work, but should really respect people. If there's not a whole lot of respect of a teaching person coming out for his or her students, then there might be some charlatanism going on there, where this person's trying to, can't figure out how to awaken, so they just decided to take charge of everybody just because they suddenly have the power or have some kind of a charisma. Charisma's, I'm sure it's very seductive to people who have a lot of natural ability to amuse people and entertain. People are like Robin Williams, just a natural at being funny and so on. Not to pick on Robin particularly. Jim.
In meditation, are our daydreams, when they're not obviously entertaining, are they a form of ignorance?
Could be. Just any kind of thing arising. At some point, the boundary between sleeping and being awake, or dreaming and being, it just goes away. The boundary of the separation there, the boundaries between everything start to come apart, except the boundaries that are really, really important, ethical boundaries. You don't have to follow rules. If you understand what this is, you're not going to interfere with anybody. You're not going to step across any boundary, regardless of what somebody else is thinking about it. You'll know yourself what you should do, how you should approach things. Quite often we get confused because we jump on that. We might think that, but then we see that we don't know what to do. And rather than understanding that, well, it's probably not time to see what to do yet. It's called patience. You wait, you look. That's why I say sometimes don't do anything unless you have to. Maybe it's not time. Maybe you need to sit here and do nothing for 3 weeks so that what you need to do, what is actually lined up with in a healthy way with everything that you are, your karma, however you want to say it. Okay, now it's time to move to Boulder. But it wasn't 2 weeks ago. It wasn't the time to do that. And just like I'm not kidding when I say I can dream right now. We're always dreaming. Images are coming up all the time for everyone. It's happening for everyone, but you, when it's not picking on you particularly, but we reject that. We want to stay here, but everything is just, we're being flooded by everything. Yes.
So when you say everything, what we see is what we need to see.
Yes.
What's before us is what we need to see.
Yes.
Is that to say then that it's perhaps a prelude to something?
Yeah, it could be, especially if you're not doing anything with it. You're just seeing it and you see, this doesn't feel very good, but I'm not going to do anything with it. Or this feels really good, but I'm not necessarily going to get presumptuous about this and think, oh yeah, I need more rice pudding. I don't need any more rice pudding. You got one bowl, that's enough. And it's just a way of talking about energies so that the awareness starts to get very shiny after a while, not because you've polished anything, that because you just spent a lot of time just watching what comes up and watching what comes up without objecting to it, without agreeing with it, and without looking away from it. You've spent so much time doing that that same ability to see clearly starts showing up in everything you're doing. And it may not be really comfortable if you've just spent 30 or 40 years trying to cover everything up. And, not, so there may, for you personally or anyone personally, there may be areas that are difficult. So having a strong awareness practice, having a Sangha, I think is important. Sangha is way more important than quite often people give to that. So I'm very interested in everybody getting to know each other and talking to each other a lot, interacting. More. Okay. Anything else on that thing?
Anna Maria.
Anna Maria Jamoka in New York, Brooklyn.
How do you, let's see, she has several questions. How do you work with well-favored in a world that is mostly content to nap? For instance, joy in helping others and misery in wanting happiness for yourself. How do you not abandon joy in doing what fulfills you, and how that also can bring joy to others?
I wouldn't get too strategic about the whole thing. Speaking directly to Anna Maria, maybe a little bit different to other people, but with Anna Maria, I would say sit a lot. I understand what she's saying. I understand what you're saying. And I'm saying, get a flat bottom. That's it. Look at it. Which she does. She does. It's not like she's not meditating. She is. She's been here several times and meditated a lot. So, but the causes and conditions, the karma that we each bring to this or to anything that we're doing is very, very different, and has a different kinds of confusion or different kinds of understanding. And so, and speaking to her, to her personally, that I understand what she's saying, and we could have a long discussion about that. But the sitting practice of meditation is the thing that needs to be increased in that particular situation. In most situations, it needs to be increased. More questions?
No, she just ends that by saying it seems there can be a trap of helping others to ignore some things one doesn't want to see in themselves.
Yeah, don't help anybody without their permission. Even if it's obvious, they need somebody's help because they're going down. It's not going to be long. I need to go in and rescue them. Don't rescue anybody. Well, but this doesn't mean if you see someone drowning, you're not in a position to ask you for help other than help. Help that person. They're yelling help. But if someone is in a situation where it's not, their trajectory in their life is not so good, it looks difficult, we can look at it. You might ask them, can I help you? This looks like this is happening. Is that what's happening? No, I'm fine. No problem. I'm fine. Get out of there. When I say get out of there, don't be mean, but don't cross that boundary. Allow people to have their karma. It's very difficult. I've given several talks on suicide, and people completely misunderstand that situation. Not that I'm so clear about it myself, but what I'm clear about is boundaries. I'm very clear about boundaries, and I have our garden out here was dedicated to someone who took their life. Because you can actually, let me say it this way. If you're not clear about the boundary and you act out of ignorance, you because things are not separate, you actually could stir up the water around that person so they would not be able to see what they're about to do to themselves. So be very careful about it. Any kind of blaming or any kind of, there's very dangerous. Not separate.
So the muck with the lotus thing.
Yeah, don't do anything unless you have to. And if you're strengthening the awareness, it'll come to, I've got to go. It won't even say I've got to do this. You'll be doing it. If you say I've got to do this, then that's a little suspicious. Because you're kind of preparing yourself to do something, and you're giving yourself some cred. When actually you just would do it. You just would save the person. You just help them. After the fact, you might think, I got my life in danger helping that person, but there's no concern for your life particularly. Okay, we can dedicate the marathon.
We've put 2 new Donna boxes outside in the hallway. One is for the teacher's gift and the other is for the temple.
May the pyramids penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jio-san the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita,